And I wanted to ask you this too. So I was the first Black male to graduate from my high school in 2005.
Whoa. Wow.
What was your experience in school? Did you live in Black community, or
Yeah.
was it like a mixture?
So people say like, oh, you're not really like us. You're the way you talk or your mannerisms, or people would question my Blackness because I didn't, not just, and so that's what I mean when I say kind of identity crisis, because
Yeah, no, I
you're
completely
right.
get it.
All right, so today we're really diving deep into sports journalism with this fascinating guy, Ben Arthur.
Yeah.
He's doing some really cool stuff. He's a journalist
Right.
for Fox Sports. He's young, he's successful,
Yeah.
but he's also got this whole thing going on, Pinnacle Code, his own media company.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about Ben's story is it's so much more than just sports.
Right.
You know, his experience as a second-generation Ghanaian American just adds this whole other layer of complexity and richness to, like, his perspective on identity, ambition.
Yeah.
You know, carving out your own path. It's really cool.
Yeah, and you pick up on that, like, hustle and heart throughout the whole interview, like how his identity has shaped his work ethic.
Absolutely.
Ben grew up right outside Seattle, Washington,
Okay.
but his parents were both born and raised in Ghana.
Well, he talks about this identity dilemma that he faced growing up. And, you know, imagine feeling like you're caught between two cultures.
Yeah.
Ghanaian culture at home.
Right.
And then just American culture like everywhere else.
This is the What Made You podcast I have today is a guy who is actually in one of my podcasts, mentorship communities that we've built together. That's how I met him. And he has an incredible story. Awesome. What I think is a pretty cool job as well, and career that he's starting to get into. And something else that will be very interesting to the common viewer, people that are interested in their communities. And so I'm going to have Ben Arthur come in, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing with people, like from baby to where you are now, just a short preview of who you are.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, Michael, thanks for having me. As you said, we got to know each other a little bit just through our podcast mentorship group. And so for me, I am a journalist and podcaster is how I describe myself. I cover the NFL for Fox Sports, and then my podcast is about empowering second and 1.5 generation Black Americans through conversations around identity, Blackness, and achievement, which is something we can discuss more, I guess, as we kind of get into the episode. But as far as my background and kind of the reasoning behind the podcast, I am second generation. My family is from Ghana, so I'm second generation Ghanaian American, both parents born and raised in Ghana. Grew up in Seattle, Washington, and so I'm 29 years old, recently turned 29, so spent my early years in Seattle. Also went to college in Portland, Oregon, so the Pacific Northwest is home for me, and grew up as an athlete. And when I kind of realized I wasn't going to be able to take it the distance, for me, being able to do sports reporting was kind of something adjacent to that, to where I could still be connected to the game and also dive into what I discovered is really a passion for storytelling, for humanizing athletes, to getting down to the root of what shapes people, the cultures that created them, and all that jazz. And so for me, that's kind of how I got to where I am today. That kind of set the foundation. I worked as a reporter at our student-run news outlet at the University of Portland, and that's kind of how I started getting those reps. And so, yeah, climbed from that point all the way to now. So that I graduated from college about 7 years ago, I think. And so that was kind of the process for me. And then just in terms of my podcasts and kind of going back to being second generation, there were a lot of things I dealt with growing up that I struggled with in terms of identity, in terms of not always feeling like I fit in, my context being different, coming from growing up in an African household, but living in an American environment. There are a lot of cultural and identity nuances that I feel like are overlooked when people discuss Black culture as a whole. And so for me, this is my podcast Pinnacle Code is a way for me to kind of dive into that. So that's kind of like I guess the short version of kind of how I got to where I am today.
Dope. Thanks, Ben. Yo, okay, so I actually would love to start on the Black culture because I wouldn't, obviously, I'm not from anywhere else but America, but I didn't grow up with the normal traditional Black or urban at all, actually. And so I would love to get your kind of how you think about this. So you say, you were born and raised here?
Yeah, born and raised here in Seattle, right outside Seattle. Yeah.
So have you actually lived in Ghana yourself? Have you traveled and visited family?
Yeah, I've visited Ghana a handful of times, but I've never lived there. But but yeah, parents from there, and because of that, I mean, came up in a Ghanaian household. So our traditions, what we ate, the music we listened to, kind of all that was Ghanaian. And so when I say it was kind of nuanced, it's because of that, right? At home, it's one way. Then you leave the house, it's right. It's like you're just kind of Black in America. And so there's a lot of different layers to that. But yeah, to answer your question, I haven't lived in Ghana, but I have been there several times.
Okay, so do you feel that it was hard for you to find a place?
Yeah.
Like, when was that, if you don't mind me asking, like, when was that time where you're like, I'm not really the same as this people, although they look like me?
Yeah.
Was there like a moment for you in that during high school, or not, maybe not in high school, like in grade school at all?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely earlier than high school. It's hard for me to pinpoint exactly when, but I guess just maybe probably middle school when you start to kind of get a fuller sense of who you are. Elementary school, I think, is maybe too early, but middle school for sure, right? And just realizing that, I mean, there's so many different nuances to like the Black experience, right? And just starting to understand that, like, okay, my reference point is different. The things I've experienced, my family's experience are different. Like, my family didn't go through like slavery or Jim Crow, redlining, all these systemic traumas that traditional Black Americans who generations of their family have been here in the U.S. have gone through. Like, I couldn't relate to that at all. But at the same time, because I was born here, I can feel for that, right, very strongly, because that's the environment I grew up in. But at the same time, I didn't fully relate to some of those things, right, because I couldn't. And because my parents are from a different country, and the way we look at things are different. And it was, I think the best way to put it is I just felt like it was kind of an identity dilemma for me, because I've always felt like I've been between cultures, right? Because I'm not fully Ghanaian. Because when I've gone to Ghana, it's like, oh, you're too American. You're not really like us, even if your parents are from here and came up here. But then also being from here, it's like, also people say like, oh, you're not really like us. You're the way you talk or your mannerisms. Or I think one great example is just like, you know, some of the traditional Black American movies that people know. That and a lot of the times when people would ask me about them, I'd say I don't know what you guys are talking about, and then people would question my Blackness because I didn't. Yeah, no, just because it's like I didn't really know. But then it's like you have to understand my parents aren't from this country, and so the things I'm watching at home aren't always the same. Isn't like the same as to kind of what you guys experience. So there are kind of little complexities, nuances in that regard. And so that's what I mean when I say kind of identity crisis, because you don't, you're right in between both sides.
I definitely get it. So I don't know if it's obvious or not, but I'm half white, half Black. So I grew up actually with my white grandmother. She's the one who raised me. Mother died whenever I was either 1 or 2 years old. I honestly don't even know. I mean, look at the newspaper clip that said it. But so I grew up where my grandmother grew up in, like, rural. We're talking cornfields. And I wanted to ask you this too. So I was the first Black male to graduate from my high school in 2005.
Whoa. My God. Wow.
So what was your experience in school? Did you live in, we talk about community, like the black community, did you live in the black community, or
Yeah.
was it like a mixture? Was it middle class where it was kind of like?
Yeah, it was. I grew up so specifically the suburbs of Seattle, so 15, 20 minutes east of Seattle in Bellevue and Issaquah, Washington. And so those areas are middle class, so I wouldn't say, not upper class, but not middle class, maybe slightly above middle class in some regard. So like some of the kids I went to school with were definitely well off. And when I say the kids, I mean most of them were white, but a good chunk of like Asian kids as well. So growing up, I was always one of the few black kids in every class. And so that's kind of where the complexity of identity kind of fits in too, because there were so few black kids in the schools I went to, like I always felt a sense of community towards my other black counterparts, right? Even if they don't also, even if they weren't also like the child of African or Caribbean immigrants or whatever. So I always felt a sense of community. I felt at home being around other black people, but then at the same time, I'd say I felt most comfortable being around other second generation kids because they understand kind of where I came from, right? Being in between cultures, whether you were born here or maybe you were born in Africa, but you've spent most of your childhood in the U.S. I always related the most to those kids, whether they were black or not. I mean, I think that's one thing with being second generation too, with kind of being in between cultures. You have a appreciation for others who have a blended cultural identity. So it didn't necessarily have to be second generation black kids. It could be Latino or Asian or European, whatever it was. I always felt like I could relate to those kids too. But
You see that? So was there a lot of immigrants in that area that you grew up in?
Particularly Asian immigrants, so like Indian, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, but not a lot of African or Caribbean, like not a lot of black immigrants by any means. There were some like Latino, like brown immigrants, but not, those were kind of a minority. When the immigrant community that was there, it was largely like Asian, for sure.
Gotcha. So I just kind of go from my own perspective, and hopefully maybe there's strikes a chord with you on that. So I don't believe I really noticed until somebody else brought it up. So I had friends, and I do specifically remember like having issues in elementary, like, oh, I can't play with you because you're black. Like my mom, my dad said, I can't play with you. I'm sorry. Like the weird conversations with that. Teachers didn't know what to do with that. And I don't know it till now, but nobody ever talked to me. Like no adult, no, those higher-ish powers, maybe the admin at the school. Don't know if they knew what to do. Because I know that I would be hurt by that, and I would probably say something about it or act up in a sense, but I never had the conversation, ever. And then middle school came around is whenever I started noticing, like, why don't I act this way, per se, that everybody else was expecting me to act? So I grew up playing baseball. I did not play basketball. We didn't have football until high school came along. Basketball was just more of like a kind of like a sideshow idea for the town. It was like, everybody loves playing basketball, but it was just waiting on baseball to come around, kind of thing. But I started noticing, like, oh man, we go to another town, whole bunch of black folk, and they're incredibly good at baskets, and everybody's expecting me to play. I'm on the bench. I don't play. I'm no good. It wasn't even a thing. It's like, all I do is play baseball. I'm outfield. I run fast. I jump high. I can do that. I can't shoot, can't dribble. It was weird. But then that's when I started to notice. I was like, okay, well, I don't even listen to the same music that they listen to. Even the conversations in the gym, conversation with other parents would be like, stay away from those people. Lock your doors when you're around those people. Hold yourself tighter when you're around those people. Make sure your hands on your wallet when you're around those people. And they would never say that word. They would say, oh, the black people when I'm around. But I did notice that the people I grew up with the students that are with me would say it because that's what their parents are actually saying while they're at home alone.
Yeah.
So that's when I said, hey, that was a transition for me. Like, oh, shoot, I'm different than you, and I don't even know why.
Yeah.
But middle school is when it started coming around. So did you ever have any experiences with that culture dilemma that you're saying, or did you have any issues with friends or having groups of friends?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt it, right? And this is why I always felt like my identity was complex, because at the end of the day, regardless of what background you came from or where your parents are from, like, you're Black in America, and that comes with the way that's what it is, right? People are going to react to you as if you're Black, right? Like the way people sometimes treat Black people, the way they talk to Black people, the microaggressions. Microaggressions was a big thing that I experienced. I can't really think of too many instances of blatant racism, but microaggressions were there all the time. Like, you brought up the whole basketball example of going to the next town over or whatever, there being a whole bunch of Black kids. Like, that's a whole stereotype of Black people, right? Like, that you play basketball and whatnot. And so even though I did play basketball growing up, it's like that was assumed even before I would bring it up, that, oh, do you play basketball? And even like I remember going to college at the University of Portland in Oregon, which is private Catholic school, and just kids coming up to me and saying, oh, are you on the basketball team and stuff like that? And like, I'm 5'8". This is a Division I school, and just assuming because you're Black, oh, this is why you're on campus, right? It's not because of your academic prowess or whatever, or the grades you got or whatever. It's because you're here to dribble a ball and shoot it into a hoop, right? And so those were the kinds of things I've dealt with all my life, whether it's come through basketball or the comments that people would make wanting to touch your hair, or even white people saying like, oh, you're kind of an Oreo, like, even I'm Blacker than you, like, assuming that Blackness can only be, first of all, the fact that you're white and you're saying that to me is crazy, but just assuming that Blackness can only be a certain type of way, being quote unquote ghetto, and since you don't carry yourself in that manner, you're not Black, and so that makes me more Black than you. So stuff like that, I dealt with that all the time. And so yeah, a lot of the things that you can think of maybe growing up Black in a suburban environment, right? And that's kind of where the nuance kind of plays a role too. Like, not only being the son of Ghanaian immigrants, but also growing up in a suburb that was predominantly white, and the way they can sometimes look at Black people or why you're in certain situations. So I dealt with a lot of that for sure.
That's interesting, man. That just really took me way back. Right?
Yeah.
So it was really cool. It's interesting to hear from literally a different lens, but kind of, I think we have the same understanding of what that dilemma. You said it right. It's just a dilemma. It's something that I'm not really that, but to the rest of the world, or at least my world that I'm in, that's what I am.
Yeah.
So you said, I think you kind of just put it all together. You said, I'm 5'8". So I was going to actually ask you, hey, why did you stop playing sports? But if it wasn't for the height, if I might ask you, was it a sense of, I don't really like doing this anymore? Or did you just decide to stop playing sports because of another passion?
I mean, honestly, it just was, I wasn't good enough. I wouldn't necessarily, it was a height thing. Like, it just wasn't coming together for me, right? I think sometimes with a lot of, people growing up, like, you may desire to be a professional athlete, but then you just get all these signs, right? And I'd always get injured a lot. And quite frankly, I just wasn't good enough. And so, like, after high school, and actually even in college, there was a point to where I thought about trying to walk on to the basketball team. But yeah, it got to a point where I was around 18, 19 to where I was like, okay, I need to kind of move on, because it was difficult for me at first, because growing up, my identity was so tied to basketball. and wanting to be a basketball player. And Kobe Bryant was my biggest idol. I mean, rest in peace. But he was his whole approach, all the whole nine. Like, I wanted to be like him. And I grew up like being in Seattle. Seattle is like a basketball city too. We've produced a lot of NBA players, and so the basketball culture was there too. And so a lot of different things played into me wanting to be a basketball player in particular. But like I said, it just got to a point to where I realized, okay, I kind of need to move on. And storytelling, like I was saying in the beginning, was a way for me to kind of still stay close to the game, but then also go after another passion, because I realized, even just in watching basketball, I loved the broadcasters, like Stuart Scott. For the NBA fans who are watching, Stuart Scott, like, rest in peace to him, but him and Marv Albert and Mike Breen and all these basketball announcers and kind of how they would communicate and all the whole 9 yards. I was so fascinated by that. And so that's kind of what kind of started nudging me in the direction of journalism, specifically sports journalism.
So as far as journalism concerned, it sounds like, are you doing mostly writing, blogging, or do you do a lot of voice, visual content in that area as well?
I would describe myself as a multimedia journalist for sure. So I do a lot. I write a lot, but I also do podcasts, audio and video. I've done some TV hits here and there. I do radio all the time as a byproduct of people reaching out, wanting to get insight on particular teams, particular matchups, particular players. And so I would say I'm kind of a cross-platform reporter. Although in college, I would say most of my experience came in writing. We had a newspaper, and so I wrote for the newspaper. But then actually in college, we were one of the first colleges with a news outlet in the country to go all digital. And so I joined the student paper my junior year, and then my senior year we went all digital. And so that's when I really started to lean into the podcast space, and that's kind of where my first love of that space started to materialize. So yeah, to answer your question, my work is kind of a cross-platform.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is there any part that you I don't want to say prefer, but that your passion, your joy comes in? Is it in the writing? Is it in the research, maybe even, or
doing features? Really, the stories where I get to really know who the people are who I'm covering, their backstory, how they got to where they are, the cultures that created them, adversity they've overcome, their psychology, like the psychology of success within greatness in sports is something I really love tackling, right? Like you look at some of the greatest athletes of all time and how they're just wired different from other people, and diving into stories in that realm. So that's kind of my wheelhouse. Those are the stories I love telling the most. So not as much the X's and O's and the game-to-game coverage, which I can do, which I've done plenty of, but it's really those stories that really humanize athletes more for sports fans and really getting to know who they are and whatnot. Those are my favorite kinds of stories. So that's what I love reporting on and preparing for, because that's when you can get guys to really open up. Right? Like, you're not just asking, why did they miss that dunk? It's like what did whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
The environment they came up in, like, why is that so important to know about, to understand who you are? Like, stuff like that is what I love.
Yeah, absolutely. So you think that maybe in your future, I don't know, I'm just guessing, I'm just throwing it out there, like biographies of certain players that you witnessed or you went through with, or conversations with, interviews with, you think that might be in something that you're interested in doing?
Possibly. It could certainly take that form. I think as long as I'm doing that, right, as long as I'm telling stories in that way, whether it be on air, whether it be through the written word, whether it be through podcasting, whether it be through a book, autobiography, whatever it is. I think as long as I'm doing that across platforms, that's what I've always kind of envisioned for myself.
Gotcha. So, okay, I found, from at least for me, leaving sports and having that hunger, that drive, that grind that you're on with your body, and kind of like taking this weird shift to, okay, I need to probably focus on. I think I had it. I was like, this is not it anymore. I don't have it in me anymore to do it. I need to find something else to do. And along the way, as I've been going through, I found, hey, I had this kind of weird like for math. And I kind of like math. I'm not super nerdy with it, but it comes to me easy. And then I started finding my way into like business and doing the finances in business. And that I decided to take that same aggression that I had within my basketball career that I ended, and I put that into this finance, into accounting at the time. Was that the same kind of moment that you had with yours for journalism, or was there like a steady stream of things, or was it just like, oh my gosh, I got to find something else to do? And you're like, okay, journalism at least keeps me in the world of sports.
Yeah, I think for me, I think maybe I kind of looked at it like that, right? Like I was kind of saying earlier, for me, it was journalism, storytelling was a way for me to still stay connected to the game, the games, while pursuing what I found was another passion, was storytelling. And so it was kind of adjacent without leaving sports entirely. I think that's probably most where that kind of rooted from it. And I think for me, it was really easy to translate. I think this is why a lot of some of the most successful people we've seen across industries were former athletes or team captains or whatever, because the discipline and the mentality you have to have in sports and collaboration and teamwork and overcoming adversity, a lot of those things can translate if you have the right frame of mind to do so. And so I think a lot of those habits, like you were saying about those habits you were able to take from your sports days into accounting and finance, I think those were the same things I did when I realized, okay, I'm not going to be an athlete anymore, but I'm going to be doing maybe something adjacent to sports and do journalism. So I think that's kind of where I kind of looked at that. And then I think that's kind of continued as I even looked at myself maybe beyond sports media too, right? Like, and that's kind of a big reason for the podcast that I'm doing, and taking some of those same habits I developed all the way when I was kind of an athlete, and doing that to also build up what I see as my long-term play, right?
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Was that something that was just at the school, or did somebody kind of spark that interest in you?
You mean in terms of like the podcasting and wanting to pursue that?
So even with the journalism before getting to the podcast, like, I can see the progression towards the podcast and having that. Okay, I want to drift into that bigger multimedia space as well that you're talking about. Was it a person that kind of guided you there? Was it a counselor? Was it your parents? Was it a friend even? Some people just like, hey, there's a journalism. You should go try that out. I know that's something you like to do. Or did you just see it and be like, I got to try that. I gotta give that a shot.
Yeah, I would say, well, it's a number of people, right, who have kind of played a role into doing what I do. I think the first person, and this kind of goes back to kind of my initial pivot into wanting to get into journalism, was to be a broadcaster, right? And so once I kind of realized that's kind of the path I wanted to go, I actually reached out to a local like play-by-play announcer in Portland, who was calling games for like a Division III school on the other side of town. I just like emailed him or whatever, like, hey, like I have an interest in sports broadcasting. Could I pick your brain? And he was like, why don't you hop on the call with me? Like, so I actually, so for a couple of games, I was doing, like, I was like color commentating with this broadcaster. And so that was a really cool experience, being able to do that. And
This is a college?
this was in college. Yeah,
Okay.
this was my sophomore year of college when I did that. And yeah, it was a really cool experience. Through that, I realized, okay, maybe I don't want to do color commentating in particular, but that was kind of my first effort to kind of get into the space. And then I had a friend in college, Malika Andrews, for anyone listening who's a fan of the NBA or ESPN, like she's one of their top she's one of the top personalities at ESPN right now. And we were close in college, and she was working at the student paper at the time. And we would always just have all these debates about the NBA and the NFL, like just going back and forth, whether it was in person or via text. And she was like, hey, I think you'd be really good at this. And so she's actually the one who got me to apply to our student paper, which is called The Beacon. Shout out to The Beacon. But yeah, that was her push, kind of got me to apply. And then while I was in it, I realized I was kind of good at it. And I got positive reinforcement from those around me and the stories I was doing and whatnot. And I had a lot of fun doing it. So yeah, those were some of the early influences. That one particular play-by-play broadcaster in Portland, and then also my friend Malika, they were very integral to me even doing what I do now, because that was kind of my first introduction into the sports journalism space.
That's pretty cool. So that's kind of like, was that kind of your internships, or did you do any other internships?
Yeah, so I did internships. So as I said, I did that that broadcasting my sophomore year. My junior year is when I first started working at our newspaper at the University of Portland. And then after my junior year, I had an internship at a TV station, Coin TV in Portland, Oregon, which is the CBS affiliate there. And so I had I was like the sports intern. So I shadowed the sports anchor a lot, the sports producer. I saw how their whole thing came together, the show, like being out in the field, getting content. Like we went to a Portland Trailblazers practice. We did all kinds of things. So I got cool experience in that regard. So that was my first official internship. And then after my senior year, I got into the Sports Journalism Institute, which is a program dedicated helping women and minorities getting into newsrooms. So I got into that program again because of Malika, because she did that program the year before. And I kind of got word of it because of her, and they have all kinds of amazing alum who've been through that program, minorities who've done really well in journalism who've gone through that program. So I applied, I got into that program, and through that program, we did I think it was like a week-long boot camp at the University of Missouri School of Journalism. So went out to Columbia, Missouri, did all kinds of like classes, and we even covered games live. Like we went to a St. Louis Cardinals game. We had to write on deadline. So we got a lot of practical experience. But then after that week, through that program, they placed me at the Denver Post. So I spent the summer after my senior year, after that time in Missouri, in Colorado. So I was a sports intern there. So I wrote on the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Rapids, the MLS team there. And so yeah, those were kind of the internships I had.
That's awesome, man. So you got a heck of a lot of experience just in the short 2 years. It sounds like. So junior and senior is just like,
I did.
You were really, really changing or molding who you are, or who you are becoming. That is at that time. That's awesome, man. So this program, it was a nationwide program, or was it something that's based in Portland?
Well, it's a nationwide program. It's pretty prestigious, kind of exclusive. They only select 12 students in the country each year. And so they have probably hundreds of applicants. And yeah, so yeah, got into that. It's not Portland based at all. They did it for the longest time, that boot camp I talked about at the University of Missouri, but they recently switched to, I think they're doing it in Arizona now, at Arizona State, at their School of Journalism in Tempe, cool. Arizona. So yeah, it's a national program.
All right, so you're 7 years out. You got tons of experience. Is there anything like in these 7 years that's like been your favorite part of this journey that you're on right now?
My favorite part, I mean, the storytelling, right? The kinds of stories I get to tell, those kinds of stories I was telling you about earlier in terms of really getting to know who these guys are. Like, those are the kinds of stories I've always loved doing the most, and the relationships you get to build with players along the way.
Is there one specifically? That
one particular story or one particular player?
Sure. Yeah. Story or player. Yeah. Whichever. That you want, you could share, or I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, I think one particular story with it, like I'd say maybe a year and a half ago, I was doing a long form story on Derrick Henry, who is one of the top running backs in the NFL, now doing his thing with the Baltimore Ravens, but I was covering him when he was with the Tennessee Titans. I live in Nashville now, and so I was at the Tennessean, which is the big local news outlet here. I was the Titans beat reporter at the Tennessean, and the Tennessean flew me out to Yulee, Florida, his hometown, to basically tell his story.
Wow.
And actually, I didn't actually get Derrick himself for that story, but I talked to people around him, some of the people who he grew up with. I went to his old high school. I talked to I got a tour of his high school, like where he went to class. So I really got a feel for like the environment that created who Derrick Henry is today, and just how that town embraces him, and how what he means to them, right? Like he's the biggest person to ever come out of that town. I mean, Yulee, Florida is right outside of Jacksonville, Florida,
Gotcha.
so like 30 minutes outside of Jacksonville, and kind of small town. But yeah, it was really cool experience. Got to see his old high school practice and whatnot, the kind of the art they had of him and whatnot. And it was a really cool experience. Yeah, I probably spent like 4 days down there.
Just in the high school, just really
like
getting a feel
was
of it.
in,
Wow.
Yeah, stayed at a hotel in Yulee, Florida, and yeah, talked to old teachers, coaches, teammates. Yeah, it was that's probably the coolest reporting experience I've had, or definitely one of them.
Yeah. Was there something that just set him apart? I know it sounds like that was just an incredible experience that you got to dive into, as that's your passion. But was there something that, like, man, I felt him. Like, I really feel why he became who he is while you were there?
That's a good question. I think, well, one thing is I really got a sense for how much of an anomaly he was.
Mm-hmm.
And that had to do with his work ethic, right? Like, he was obviously the most talented athlete they've ever had in the history of this town.
To be fair, Hall of Fame coming up, right?
Yeah. He's gonna be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, no doubt about it. And so the talent was obviously there, in the stories they told me of him just dominating, just crazy stat lines, ridiculous stat lines, and some of the color I would get, like, of people who were at particular games witnessing these games that he had live, but then just the understanding of his work ethic, right? Like, you could be so much better than everyone else, but still have almost this inhumane work ethic to be great, and just understanding just his family circumstances and the struggles and just the motivation and the drive he had. And also, I think a big part of it too, just getting a sense of, like I said, like Yulee, Florida is kind of a small town, and how much of a chip he had on his shoulder because of that environment. You know, people kind of overlooking Yulee, Florida in general, and that playing a big part in his identity, right? Just adding another chip to this massive chip like he already has on his shoulder, but maybe not always feeling like he got the respect that he deserved. And yeah, there was a situation, I mean, this isn't particularly profound, but one story I did hear was about how, like, when Derrick was going to school in Yulee, Florida, they didn't even have a high school in the town, so they had to go to the next town over to go to high school. But then I think around Derrick's sophomore year or right as he was getting into high school, that's when they created the high school for Yulee kids. The chip they had on their shoulder because of that, getting looked down upon because, small town, and they started out bad.
Yeah.
Like when he was a freshman and I think parts of his sophomore year, they just weren't good. And just as he kind of started to take off and become one of the top players in the United States, and Yulee High School was all of a sudden getting all this attention, he never really forgot about how they were overlooked and all that.
Yeah.
And so those were some of the things that kind of I remember about reporting that story.
I really felt a sense of this through our whole entire conversation. Do you think that same feeling, that same sense, that mindset shift, that thing that we have as sports athletes, is that something that's always drove who you are? Do you feel like you still have a chip on your shoulder for what you do or what you put your mind to? That even with journalism, and like, are you never satisfied? Like, that's kind of how I feel. I don't want to put that on you.
Yeah.
I always have this weird sense of like, I don't know what it is. I always feel in second place, even if I'm killing it. Like, I'm like, man, somebody's just like a little bit better. Like, where am I missing out on? Do you have that same weird sense of drive that kind of keeps pushing forward?
Yeah, that's the story of my life. That's always been there. This never-ending pursuit to kind of better myself and be the best I can be, and just being an underdog my whole life, whether it was because of all the identity stuff I went through, or being Black in the environment I grew up in, always being the shortest kid on every basketball team I was on growing up, always feeling like I had to work 3 times harder than everyone else. And then also just being Black in my environment, understanding, like something my mom always told me, being Black, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far sometimes as your counterparts of other races. And that's kind of the truth, and kind of internalizing that. And then just, that whole mindset carrying into journalism too. And it could be kind of dark too, right? I think in that desire to succeed at the highest level, there has to be a level of darkness in there too, because you're almost never satisfied, right? And I can't turn the switch off, so to speak. It's just a part of who I am. But it's a reason why I think I've been able to achieve some of the things I've been able to do. But yeah, it's not something I feel like I can turn off. And yeah, I'm definitely the type who kind of uses everything as a slight, especially early in my career when I'd get passed over for particular jobs. I remember coming out of college, I thought, the floodgates would open for me in terms of opportunity because of my internship experience, being part of the Sports Journalism Institute, as I said, and applying to it felt like hundreds of places, and no one got back to me. No one wanted to take a chance on me. And the few people that did, it was either, maybe an automated, like the whole, when you submit an application online, it's like, oh, unfortunately, you did not get through to the second round or whatever. So all those little things pissed me off.
Yeah.
So yeah, that whole...
What keyword did I not put in?
Exactly.
Come on now.
Exactly. So yeah, that's always been a big part of my identity for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that should be true for most people. And we talk about mindset. And this is really what this whole podcast is about. Like, how I want to show people that typically there is a mindset shift. You get out of like this weird safety, and you like, okay, there's always a moment, I believe, in everybody's life that they have to go to the next level, or they have to try that new thing, because it's either that or die, in a sense, and in analogy wise or metaphorically speaking. So for you, what is next? What is your next move? Is it career? Is it small business?
For me, I'm continuing to build out my career as a multimedia NFL reporter and building out Pinnacle Code, my podcast, simultaneously. That's kind of where my headspace is at right now. I want to continue to grow and ascend in my sports media career. I'm in the last year of my contract at Fox Sports. And so this is kind of a big opportunity for me. I mean, we hear a lot about athletes wanting to ball out, quote unquote, in their contract year to get that next deal or whatever. And so that's a space I feel like I'm at in terms of my sports media career. But then at the same time, I'm committed to continuing to build out Pinnacle Code, my podcast, and I have a vision of it being a media company. I want to build it out into a media company long term. So that's kind of where my headspace is at, building out both simultaneously, because both speak to who I am, right? The whole NFL reporting career, it's kind of what I do, but then Pinnacle Code is kind of an extension of who I am. So both of those things are kind of a part of my story and what I'm passionate about. So yeah, I'm building out both right now.
That's awesome. Do you have anybody that you like follow for to keep accountable to that thing that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fluid process, right? I mean, I have so many different mentors and people I look up to, people I talk to, but then also people who don't know that I look up to them and kind of look at what they've done and the steps they've taken and try to look at, okay, how can I emulate that in terms of my own life? I think what I'm kind of doing is unique because I haven't necessarily seen anyone who's trying to do what I'm doing in terms of building out their sports media career, in terms of being a talent, but then also building out a non-sports related media company, but doing both of those things at the same time. So I don't know that I really have anyone to look up to in terms of that path specifically. And so that's why it's hard for me to pinpoint one mentor. But I have people I look up to in the sports media space. I have people I look up to in terms of turning podcasts into media companies. And so I kind of take from both of those and apply that to my circumstances and do it in my own unique, authentic way.
Okay, so you said contract. So I'm going to take it to a place that I think that I understand. And maybe you can correct me on that. So your next contract, I would assume when you're in the space for the amount of time that you've been, you're kind of at a point where everybody that's at the same place is kind of, they're good, right? You all are fairly good. Is in the next person to get that next contract or that next job, and you said talent, so it's maybe go this route, or even the athletes, thinking that case, building your own brand that sets you apart. Is it kind of like your following? Is it just the network that you get into? Is it working for this outside of Fox or CBS or MSNBC, or is there like one company that's bigger than the other and that's where you're trying to get into? Or is it your personal brand and they give you the contract because they want your following?
Yeah, I think, well, to answer kind of the first part of that question, I think it's my authenticity that stands out. And so yeah, kind of like you were kind of saying like that, the podcast, what I'm building on the side of my career, that's part of my brand, right? My personal brand, so to speak. And so I think that makes me, that I stand out because of that, my personal experiences and bring that into my career. And then also just the value I try to add, right, to my company, Fox Sports, and trying to stand out within the realms of my current role, right? So it's doing that, not only just work ethic, but figuring out, okay, how else can I like add value in my environment at Fox Sports, but then at the same time building out what I see as my personal brand and my long-term vision project in Pinnacle Code. Like that's a part of that too. So I don't look at myself as competing with anyone because there's only one me. And so I think especially recently, I've been leaning into that more, just my authenticity and my story. And And then, yeah, in terms of my career, like there isn't one particular place that I'm trying to get to, right? When I was a kid, it was ESPN, right? And I think a lot of kids who grow up in the sports world, it's like, oh, you want to be on ESPN or whatever. And yeah, so for me, it's not really that anymore. I don't look at getting to a particular company as my destination. It's more so about the work I'm doing and how I'm showing up as myself in doing that work.
Just for the people out there that might be interested, at the space you're at, what would be like a comfortable salary that you would kind of be looking for in a contract? Or is a contract like a 3-year deal? You get like 40% of it up front, and then you get to use the rest of it throughout the 3 years that you're in? Or what does that really look like for you?
Yeah, it's really nuanced because I work at a media conglomerate. My situation is different than those who like still work at like traditional newspapers. Like I'm under contract. I'm on a multi-year contract, and like I said, I'm on the last year of my contract. And typically, like those in my shoes, when you're at a media conglomerate like a CBS or an NBC, ESPN, Fox Sports, I mean, we typically make more money, right? Because, I mean, you have the TV money, like the TV rights, all that, like what with the sports leagues coming in to support the business and whatnot. And so that puts me in a different kind of bracket, so to speak, if that makes sense, than like newspapers, which, I mean, they're all different kinds of ownership structures with newspapers, but I mean, those, you typically don't get paid as much. So I mean, it's very well known that journalists in general don't really get paid much. That's especially so on the local journalism newspaper side. So with my age and where I'm at and where I work, I feel like I make good money in the 6 figures range and whatnot. And so yeah, I'm in a good place. Of course, I'm looking to elevate and maximize my earnings potential, maximize the value I'm adding and whatnot. But that's kind of how that works out. And yeah, usually with like local newspapers and whatnot, you're an at-will employee. And so, but like with me, like being at Fox Sports,
is that like they'll give you stipends per game, or is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, so when I say like at will, so it's like you could just leave, or the newspaper could decide to terminate you. But like with me, like I'm under contract, right? So like, and I've had a certain amount of, I guess, guaranteed money, so to speak, but I still I get paid on like a bi-weekly basis, which is still the same as when I was an at-will employee when I worked at a local newspaper. Because I have a contract, it's kind of a different world, so to speak, if that makes sense. Like my contract is a lot more similar to like TV people than it is newspaper folk. So
okay. Yeah. So it's not necessarily hourly. It's more about performance, completing I assume completing a certain amount of tasks per week or whatever that may be for you, or writing a certain amount of blogs, or going on to doing certain commercials, whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm getting paid the same amount every 2 weeks, right? Because my contract is set in stone. So whether I wrote one story that week, or I happen to write 4, or whatever, how many games I covered, regardless, I'm still getting paid the same amount. But because of the nature of my job, and that's where being a journalist working in sports media is so different than other people's jobs, right? Because you know exactly what you're doing each and every day. You have a checklist that you have to go through. But working in news, breaking news happens all the time. Like it could happen at 10 p.m. on a Friday, and I just want to be with my girlfriend, but so-and-so just got traded, or such and such just got arrested, or this game is going to triple overtime, and so instead of the game being done at 3, it ends at 6. Or if it's a Sunday night game, that's the difference between the game ending at 10:30 and 12:30, and staying after for not only to file maybe your initial story, but going down to the locker room, doing the press conferences, doing the interviews with the players in the locker room. Wow. So yeah, my schedule looks very different depending on the week, and there's a lot of travel involved in what I do, right? So I travel a lot depending on what my game assignment is, so to speak. So yeah.
That's cool. Man, I didn't. I'm glad you talked about it, because I would never even know that that's the type and style that you're floating with and all the travel. I didn't even know they travel that much. Okay, so that's pretty cool to hear that side of it. So I just gonna hopefully can break something down for somebody that's just getting in this space. Like, man, that sounds like a dope job to get into, or a career path to go to. If it were you, I'm not gonna try to. I just want to get a nice little avatar. Same you, right? Young Ben is in college right now, and knowing what you know now, what would be like the perfect career path? Is there like to go through to get to where you are now? No, if you could just miss every stumbling block that you went through, what would you say is, hey, like, I would do this, I would then get a job doing this, I would then maybe even start my social media to get my brand awareness out, and, do your thing? On how would you do that as a young man, 21 years old, senior in college, and is ready to get out there and destroy the world?
Wait, so being a senior in college and you're about to enter the workforce, or you're just looking to get into journalism while in college? You mean the former?
I'll start with, I'm about to graduate college. I'm in journalism. I love it. I've done an internship or two, and I'm graduating, and now I need to make some moves.
Yeah. I mean, it starts with, apart from the obvious, like applying for jobs, I mean, looking to build relationships. It's so true in journalism, like in so many other industries. I mean, relationships will really determine how far you get. And so if I was a senior just about to enter the workforce, right, just got my diploma, I'm looking to build as many relationships with editors and hiring managers as possible. That would mean cold emails, cold calls, if possible, going to journalism conventions, conferences to connect with people. Because the unique thing about the journalism industry is that it can feel so big, right? Because everyone's across the country, but it's like everyone knows each other, right? Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's like you'd be graduating from college out of Ohio, and you're maybe talking to an editor at the newspaper in Cleveland, but he has a buddy who runs something in Tennessee, who has a friend who's kind of the lead, the executive editor at the LA Times. Like, it's the connection points are so deep and vast that it kind of just emphasizes the importance to kind of just start where you are and just start putting yourself out there. And so I think one thing I did was I think I focused maybe too much on the job part of it, which was important, right? Because I needed to get a job. But I think if I was to maybe redo it, start to look more at like the relationship component of it, because the doors that will open for you just because you're reaching out and you're showing that willingness, you'll be surprised how many people will be having conversations when you're not around, like with their buddies across the country, like, hey, I think you need to check out this kid, or I think you need to check him out, or I really, just his intentionality, whatever, this, that, and the third. Like, it can get to a point where it really starts to compound to where you never have to look for a job almost, because I think starting out, like I said, I think I maybe over-indexed and just like trying to look for jobs. But then once I got that first job and started to build relationships and whatnot, it got to a point where people were just reaching out to me. Like, and I wasn't doing anything. Like, I was just putting out good work. I was continuing to like maybe preserve the relationships I had and start to reach out to maybe more people. But then it gets to a point where people are just reaching out. Hey, you want to cover this, or you want to do that, or I heard about you from so-and-so. Like, it just kind of becomes almost overwhelming. So yeah, really so really focus on like the relationships and
Focus on the
focusing
relationships.
Yeah.
You said editors, and what else was
hiring people who have hiring power.
managers.
Because a lot of times what people will do in journalism is look at the people they see on TV, right? And they want to reach out to those people, which is great, right? Yep. And you could maybe
perfecting
connect
your
with them.
craft,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
but they don't have hiring power. You have to go to the people
Yeah.
who like who pays them. Like go to who pays the people you look up to
That's
and
good.
build relationships with those people, because that will get you much further. Not to say you don't need both, but focusing on those with hiring power, with executive power, with editing power. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks. That's good. I know that's helped somebody. It's got to. It's got to. We always hear relationships, and then we're like, okay, what does that even mean? And I'm so glad that you took it a little step further and like, okay, this person. So that's good. That's really good. And you really stress it. Hey, make sure you stick with your craft. Making sure you're doing well, like those people
Yeah,
that are
you have
with
to do
you
the
as
work,
well.
right?
You gotta be able to do the work, or honestly, it won't even matter.
Exactly. Yeah, you could be the most liked person, right? But if you're not good at what you do,
You get
I
up there and you're
mean,
just
it doesn't
stuttering.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
LeBron, I love you.
exactly.
That's so funny, man. Hey, so was there any like inspirations as far as like books, or is there any like podcasts that you could even to share with this audience and say, hey, this is what another method I would go down to at least get more information about journalism, or if you like it or not, or how to get better skills in it. I assume even you had to learn how to speak well, correct? Is there some things that you did to craft that as well?
Yeah, honestly, like with sports media, with journalism, I don't think it's really in the books. It's really about, again, doing the work. Like, I think people can get so caught up in like the fanciness of the journalism school you went to or the resources you have. But I went to a school that didn't have any journalism school, but we've produced people like myself who's at Fox Sports, Malika who's at ESPN. We have two people who are at CNN, and we didn't have a formal journalism program. Like the heavy hitters in journalism are like Syracuse University, like for broadcast journalism. There's Arizona State. There's the University of Missouri. They have fantastic journalism programs, and they've produced phenomenal journalists too. But people need to focus on the work itself, like getting out there and failing and learning how to report, learning how to talk to people, being curious, learning what works, what doesn't, getting a feel for your style. I think those are the most important things. Like
That's awesome.
reporting and journalism is the kind of field to where you just kind of need to do it and not learn about the theory of communication or the philosophy of how you should go about it. You just need to do it.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily read about how you should approach a locker room. Just go in a locker room and figure out what works and what doesn't. So I'm a big proponent of just going out and doing it, because that's what helped me. And yeah, and honestly, I couldn't even think of a particular book in terms of journalism that tells you the blueprint of how to be a journalist the right
Cool.
way. I know there are books like that maybe for business or finance, for law,
Yeah.
but
Tons
not
of them.
necessarily in journalism. So I'd say go out and do the work and then read and watch people who are good at the job, right? So reading great journalism, watching great interviews. I think all
Yeah.
those things will help you more than any book or course that you can take.
It's dope. Honestly, I want to be respectful of your time, and I think that was one of the best outros that I have had just from that little speech that you just made right there. So, if you could share, or if you have anything to share, maybe even a website. I know that you're trying to build out your media company as well, your podcast. Do some shameless plugs here and let everybody know who you are and where they can meet you at.
For sure. And first of all, Michael, thank you for the time and for having me. This was great. Loved the conversation. For people who want to tap in with me, I mean, you can find my work on foxsports.com. If you go to the personalities page, look up Ben Auther, and when you click on that, you'll see all the stories I've written, all the videos I've done, all the podcasts I've done. And then in terms of Pinnacle Code, it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search Pinnacle Code and you'll find it. So yeah, on there, and then active on social media on X for Fox Sports covering the NFL. So at Ben Y Arthur, BENYARTHUR. Same with Instagram, and then Pinnacle Code. I'm active on Instagram as well, at Pinnacle_code as well. So that's where people can find me.
Hey, Ben, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for coming on, and thank you so much for sharing what I believe is hopefully going to change somebody's life. So I appreciate you, my guy.
No problem. Thanks for having me.